What would you do if you walked into a barn to buy a horse and found a woman bruised and chained like she had been forgotten by the whole world? Clay Vannor never expected his life to split in two that day, before and after the barn. He rode up from Del Rio under a thin, pale sun, tired from days in the saddle. Clay was 34, worn by wind and dust, a quiet man who carried old losses in his eyes. People said he had known more graves than weddings, and the truth was not far from that. His horse moved slow across the dry land as he reached the Rusk place around noon. The ranch looked lifeless. The house stood squat and gray, with dust stuck to its windows like old regret. The barn leaned east, as if it had grown too tired to keep standing straight. Chickens wandered without care. A mutt barked once and then gave up. No children laughed. No woman moved around the yard. Only emptiness lived there. The man who greeted Clay was thick around the belly, red in the face, and sweating even in the light breeze. He wiped his hands on stained trousers and tried to smile. "You Clay Vannor?" Quote, "I am. You're here for the sorrel." "That's right. She's in the barn. Go take a look. I'll fetch the papers." Clay didn't like the man's voice. Something oily sat beneath it. But he came for a horse, nothing more. He walked toward the barn, leading his own mare by the reins. The yard felt too quiet, like even the dust didn't want to make noise. When he pushed open the barn door, the smell rolled out first. Hay, dung, and something sharper. Rust. Iron. Blood if you knew the scent. Inside was dim. Light cut through cracks in the roof in thin stripes. Clay's eyes adjusted slow. The sorrel mare stood in the far stall, a good-looking animal, bright-eyed and calm. But Clay didn't move toward her. Something else was in the shadows. A shape, small, wrong for a barn. He stepped closer. It was a woman. She lay curled on her side, near a pile of old tack, wrists chained to the wall by a rusted bolt. Her dress was torn and filthy. Her hair hung in clumps. Her skin was covered in bruises in different colors, old and new. A scab on her cheek stretched tight when she breathed. One of her eyes was swollen, almost shut. She looked up at him, slow, scared, exhausted, and said nothing. Clay knelt. His hand hovered near her wrist, then her face. "You hurt bad," he murmured. Still, she did not speak. A board creaked behind him. Clay straightened and turned. The red-faced man stood in the doorway, the bright light framing him like a warning. "She don't talk," he said. "Found her near my land couple weeks ago. Half dead. I fed her, gave her water. Got her locked up, 'cause she's wild, mean as a rattler. Bit my boy Kane clean through the hand." Clay's jaw tightened, but he kept his face still. "She's got the devil in her," the man added. "You got papers on her too if you want." Clay's voice cut him in half. "I'm here to buy a horse, not a person." "That ain't what this is." "Hell, I saved her." Clay took one step. The man's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Clay moved faster. His fist struck the man's jaw hard enough to crack like dry wood. The man fell backward into the dirt outside, moaning. Clay didn't spare him another look. He returned to the woman. "I'm going to get you loose," he said gently. She flinched at his voice, but she didn't pull away when he drew his knife and worked at the bolt. The metal was old, stiff with rust and dried blood. It fought him, but it gave. When he lifted her, she weighed almost nothing, like a shadow held together by breath alone. Clay carried her past the man groaning in the dust, past the sorrel mare, past the yard that had seen too much. He set her on his horse, climbed up behind her and rode away without looking back. She didn't speak. He didn't ask her name. Some names were buried deep, waiting to be earned again. They rode across the plains until the sun bled into the horizon. By nightfall, they reached a dry creek bed where mesquite grew thick. Clay laid out a blanket and handed her water. She took it with shaking hands. He cooked beans in a dented tin pot. She didn't reach for it at first. He left the bowl near her feet and turned his back. After a long moment, he heard her eat slowly, like each bite hurt. That night, she didn't sleep. Her eyes stayed open, watching every shadow. Clay pretended to sleep, but he stayed awake too. Something about the way she breathed told him the danger wasn't done. Not by a long shot. By the third day on the trail, she could sit upright again. On the fourth day, she no longer flinched when he came near. On the fifth, her voice finally rose, rough and cracked like old rope. "Name's Mara." Clay nodded once. She washed her face in a stream that night until the water ran brown with dirt and blood. When she asked where they were going, Clay said, "My land. Past Arroyo Blanca. No one comes out there unless they got reason." "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Clay stared into the fire. A man who keeps quiet while something wrong is happening is already dead. "Just don't know it yet." Mara didn't answer, but the next morning she saddled the sorrel herself. By dusk they reached Clay's ranch, small but solid, tucked near a ridge where pines whispered in the wind. He showed her the spare room. She stood in the doorway a long time before stepping inside. Clay didn't ask her to stay. He didn't need to. She slept for 2 days straight. Then the real story began. Clay knew the quiet wouldn't last. Mara moved through the ranch like someone learning how to live again. She patched fences with slow, careful hands, fed the goats even when her arms shook, washed her wounds with vinegar and hissed when it burned. She spoke little, but her eyes watched everything, like she expected chains to drop from the ceiling at any moment. Clay gave her space. He didn't ask what had happened in that barn. She didn't ask why he helped her. They worked side by side in the long, hot days, but there was always something between them. Fear, memory, or maybe the start of something stronger. Then one morning, she was gone. Clay saw the empty saddle first, the sorrel mare missing. Mara's tracks headed east. He followed fast, heart tight in his chest, not from anger but a strange worry he didn't know how to name. He found her crouched in the brush 10 miles from the Rusk place. She wasn't running. She was watching the homestead. He stepped behind her without sound, but she still knew. "I didn't come to go back," she said. "I came to see if he's still breathing." Clay's voice stayed even. "You think to finish him?" "I thought to know if he'd die on his own." She stared at the house. No smoke, no voices, no life. "I can't live knowing he might still breathe," she whispered. Clay didn't try to stop her. Some things needed confronting. They walked to the house together. Inside, the air was thick with rot. Bottles on the floor. Blood smeared on the boards. A boy, maybe 15, lay in a corner clutching his stomach with a dirty rag. He looked up when they entered. "You came back," he rasped. Mara froze. Clay stepped slightly in front of her. "Where is he?" Mara asked. The boy coughed. "Gone. Took the wagon south 2 days ago. Said he'd be back with men. Said you'd regret getting loose." Clay's jaw clenched. Mara stepped forward. "I'm not here for you." "I ain't a boy," the kid said, eyes hard. "I'm the one who held the chain while he whipped you." Mara's fingers twitched near her side. Her breathing shook. Clay moved between them fast. "Enough." Quote. She stared at the boy for a long moment. Then her hand loosened. Her eyes turned cold, not angry, just done. They left him there, the house silent behind them. That night, back at the ranch, Mara scrubbed herself clean in a basin until her skin turned red. Clay waited outside by the fire, listening to the water splash and her breath quicken. When she stepped out, her hair still wet, she stared into the flames. "I'm not afraid of him," she said. Clay nodded. "I know. But I need to know how to make him afraid of me." Clay met her eyes. Something had settled in her, something steady, controlled, and dangerous. "Then we start tomorrow." The next days changed everything. They trained from before sunrise. Clay taught her how to hold a rifle, how to brace her shoulders so the recoil wouldn't bruise. She learned fast. Steady aim, quiet breath, cold focus. "You miss your shot," Clay said, watching her reload. "You better be ready to follow with something sharper." She nodded and fired again, hitting a pine knot dead center. They practiced with knives, too. Clay taught her how to stand, how to move her feet, how to strike with strength that didn't rely on size. She listened to every word, no fear, no hesitation. They set traps, snares, tripwires, a full storeboard that dropped weighted nails. Clay made her reset each one blindfolded. "Know your ground better than the men who want to take it," he said. She repeated his lesson until she could rebuild each trap in the dark. At night, she sat by the fire with her knees pulled close, quiet, thinking. Clay didn't push her to talk. But sometimes she did, voice calm, like recounting someone else's memories. "He thought breaking me was a kind of keeping," she said. "Like trapping a bird till it stops trying to fly." Clay spit into the dust. "He won't be thinking anything when you're done." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, just a little. Then one evening a rider appeared on the trail, dust rising behind him. He stopped at the gate and called out. Clay met him first, rifle resting easy in his hands. The rider was lean, scar down his lip, eyes too sharp to trust. "I come from south of Choya Bend," he said. "Looking for a woman, short hair, talks little, rode off with a man, fits your look." Clay didn't answer. The man smirked. "Name's Jero. My brother's been missing a month. Last seen with a sorrel mare and a busted jaw." Mara stepped from the barn then. Her face had healed some, but her eyes were cold fire. Jero's smile died. "You!" Before he could finish, Mara spoke. "Tell your brother I'll come find him." Not the other way around. Jero swallowed, fear flickering behind his eyes. He turned his horse and rode off fast. Mara watched him disappear. Clay looked at her carefully. That was a choice. "I made it. You could have killed him. That would have been mercy." Clay didn't argue. 2 days later, they found a trap near the river sprung. Blood on the dirt. Goat gone. "He's testing us," Clay said. Mara crouched low, eyes scanning the trail. "He wants us to chase." "We won't." "No," she said. "He'll come here." They fortified the ranch, dug trenches, lined the barn entrance with broken glass and old nails. Mara wore a pistol low on her hip now, moving like someone who had finally stepped into her own shadow. Then at dusk, smoke rose on the horizon. 3 riders. 1 wagon, Jero at the front. Mara stepped forward beside Clay, calm as the settling dust. "They think I'm still afraid," she said quietly. Clay looked at her. "Are you?" She didn't answer, because she didn't have to. Dusk settled like a slow warning across the plains. The sky glowed orange at the edges, fading into a deep, bruised purple. Clay stood on the porch with his rifle held low but ready. Mara stepped forward beside him, shoulders straight, face steady, breath calm. 3 riders approached. Jero led them. Behind him came 2 hired guns, rough men with easy mouths and ugly hearts. A wagon rolled behind them, empty except for rope and iron. They came not to talk. They came to take her back. But Mara wasn't the same woman they had chained in a barn. Jero called out, "We're here for the girl. Hand her over, and maybe we leave you breathing." Mara stepped past Clay into the open yard. The breeze lifted her hair off her bruised cheek. "Then come take me," she said. Jero grinned, cruel and sure of himself. He thought she was bluffing. He thought she was still weak. He thought wrong. His hand dropped toward his gun. Too slow. A single shot cracked through the evening air. Jero's hat flew from his head, spinning into the dirt. The bullet had shaved a line across his temple, close enough to take skin. Clay blinked. He hadn't fired. It was Mara. The 2 hired guns jerked back in surprise. Before one could run for cover, Clay fired once, dropping him with a shot to the throat. The other dove behind the wagon, scrambling for safety. He didn't make it. One of Mara's traps, spiked boards hidden under loose dirt, caught his leg. His scream tore across the yard. Jero stumbled behind the wagon, clutching his bleeding temple. Mara walked toward him slowly, steady, cold, not shaking, not afraid. Clay followed behind her, covering every angle with his rifle. But Mara didn't need him now. This was her storm, her reckoning. Jero tried to lift his pistol. He cried through clenched teeth, "You don't have the guts." Her bullet hit his shoulder. He spun, fell, crawled in circles in the dirt, pain twisting his face. "You should have died in that barn," he gasped. Mare kept walking. "You held the chain," she said. "And you smiled while I bled." He tried to crawl backwards, boots kicking hopelessly. "I was following orders. It wasn't me. It wasn't my choice." Mare knelt beside him, her voice steady and clear. "You enjoyed it. That's what makes you worse." Jero sobbed as she lifted her pistol, but she didn't let him beg. She didn't need to hear it. She fired once. His body sagged still. Mare stood up slowly, breathing deep, looking at her hands like she wasn't sure they belonged to her anymore. Clay stepped beside her. "You done?" Quote. She looked at the sky, at the barn, at the dirt still shaking from the fight. "For now," she said. They buried the bodies far from the ranch, under flat stones on dead ground where nothing grew. Mare worked the shovel without stopping, as if she had waited years for the weight of dirt to feel this final. When they finished, she washed in silence. Clay watched her from the porch, knowing this wasn't the end. Not for her, not for what had been done. For weeks afterward, the ranch settled into a strange calm. Mare woke early, fed the animals, tended the land. She moved with purpose, but little peace. Some days she laughed once or twice, a sound Clay had never imagined she could make. Other days her eyes looked far away, like she was walking through old memories. Clay didn't push. Healing wasn't a straight road. Revenge wasn't either. But one morning, he found her sitting on the ridge overlooking the valley, boots dusty, hands folded in her lap, eyes hard. "They won't stop with him," she said. "Men like that don't die alone." Clay sat beside her. "No, they don't." "I don't want fear anymore," she whispered. "I want memory. I want them to know. I remember." Clay took a slow breath. "Then we find the others." She turned her head. "You'd help me." "I started this," he said. "I won't let you finish alone." The wind rolled across the ridge, cold and steady. Mare closed her eyes for a moment, letting it touch the parts of her heart that had been locked away. When she opened them again, something new lived there. Not fear, not anger, purpose. Clay rode into town that same afternoon. He returned with rifles, powder, wire coils, and a tin box filled with names. Names spoken in whispers, names of men who walked free while others suffered in silence. Mare opened the box and saw the names written on folded slips. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't tremble. "I'm going to find them," she said. Clay nodded. "We'll start at first light." So they rode, west, north, south, across hard country, through towns with voices that carried old sins, through places where silence hid the wicked. Together they hunted men who thought the past would stay buried. Mare became a shadow whispered in saloons, a warning spoken at campfires, a name carved into fear. Clay became the quiet storm at her side, steady and fierce in his loyalty. But somewhere in all that blood and dust, something else grew too. Not fast, not loud, but real. One evening, months after the barn, after the graves, after the smoke and the pain, Clay found Mare sitting by a fire, warming her hands. She looked at him. Really looked. "You saved me," she said softly. Clay shook his head. "No, you saved yourself. I just cut the chain." She stared at the flames. "What do we do now?" Clay watched her like a man watching dawn break over land he thought was lost. "We live," he said. "If you want to." She nodded, slow and certain. "I think I do." They built a small home near the ridge, a place where the land was quiet and the past felt distant, a place where she planted sage and learned to breathe again, a place where Clay finally smiled without pain behind it. Mare still carried her pistols. Clay still watched the trail at night. Danger didn't vanish. Memory didn't fade. But life grew anyway. And one evening as the sun dipped low and the wind carried the smell of pine across the valley, Mare said, "It's quiet now." Clay took her hand. For the first time since the barn, Mare let someone hold it. The road behind them was made of fire. The road ahead was made of healing. and they walked it together.